One common experience that comes up quite regularly in professional careers, including academia, are those situations where an individual has to decide whether to trust their gut or their instinct, so to speak, or whether to go with the conventional wisdom and guidance and advice from those around them. And you will hear stories regularly about two common situations. One situation is where someone has not trusted their gut, has gone with the common sense advice from those around them, and then has deeply regretted the outcome because they feel they should have trusted their gut, at least in retrospect. The other situation, and this is the one you probably hear even more of, is a situation where, against all conventional wisdom and advice, someone went with their gut instinct or feeling, and contrary to all expectations, were wildly successful in terms of whatever decision that enabled them to make. You hear this scenario come up quite often in certain situations, like, for example, a startup founder going against the conventional wisdom and doing something very different and ending up very successful. Now, gut instinct or instinct is not very well defined, but I would define it as when there's a decision coming up or a choice, and you have a very, very strong, unshakable feeling about what decision or what outcome you should choose. Sometimes gut instinct is associated with it being a little bit difficult for you to articulate the reasons for why you feel that way, but it's underpinned by this very, very strong feeling that you should go a certain way. And in most of the stories you hear about, there's this tension between your gut instinct telling you to do things one way and conventional wisdom or advice from people around you telling it to do it differently. In my personal circumstances or career, one that has come up quite often is in grant and fellowship applications. I've often been told to adopt a fairly conventional approach to writing the proposals, but I've really felt in certain circumstances that the outreach and engagement and science communication aspect of my career has been an inseparable part of my identity for the last 25 years and have written it in strongly, even though it's not formally assessed by the criteria in many cases. And I've done this enough times to know that at least in that case, my gut feeling, which contradicted what a lot of common sense and advice told me, seems to have paid off. Now, I wanted in this video to move beyond these simple narratives of these two situations where someone didn't trust their gut instinct and then really regretted it, and the alternative situation where someone trusted their gut instinct and were wildly successful despite being told that they shouldn't do it this way. I don't think these narratives are particularly helpful because they don't represent the reality for most people. Now, the reality for most people is if you are in a job where you are infinitely capable of doing that job, it's not pushing you remotely towards your boundaries of capability or experience or skill sets, then your gut instinct about any decision or feeling about how something should be done will, not surprisingly, almost always be correct. And so in those situations, trusting your gut, of course, is a sensible thing to do. There's no surprises there. But the reality is, in a lot of careers, and academic careers or research careers would be one of these, we're always or constantly pushing our boundaries. We're moving into areas that are a little bit beyond our set of experiences so far in life, that are pushing us into areas where perhaps our skill sets are not so well developed. And in those situations, it's a much more messy situation because a lot of the time the conventional wisdom and advice will be correct. Some of the time your gut instinct will be correct, but your gut instinct by no means will be this infallible source of truth. And if you trust it blindly, it's also going to get you in a lot of trouble. I'll explain a little bit later in this video some of the reasons why this might be so, and also come up with a framework or a set of principles for how you can go about this decision between trusting your gut and going with the conventional wisdom. Now, the framing of this story around trusting your gut or your instinct is often in the context of what does your gut instinct tell you to do versus what does conventional wisdom and well-meaning advice from those around you tell you to do. And often it's set up that these are telling you to do very different things. Now, because of this context, it's important to think about a few key factors. The first is the similarity or gap in experiences and skill set between your own personal experiences and skill set in the particular domain of the area where you're making the decision, and of those around you who are giving you advice around how you should go about things. If there is a big gap where you don't have a lot of experience, you don't have a lot of the skill set, and the people around you who are giving you advice are very experienced and very skillful in the area, that should tell you that you should bias your weighting of which way to go somewhat more towards the people who are experts. Now, there are always exceptions, hundreds, thousands, millions of exceptions. This is just saying that you should consider that gap in experience, and if there's a large gap in experience, it increases somewhat the chances that your gut instinct isn't actually the way to go, and you should go with the conventional wisdom. Now, of course, that's not always true. One of the situations where that's not always true is if these really experienced people who have great skills and knowledge in the area that you're making the decision in are not personalizing their experience to your specific background, your specific circumstances, and your specific aspirations and goals. So if you find that the advice that people are giving you is very much cookie cutter advice, even though these are experienced people, then you know that you should probably bias your trust somewhat back towards your gut feel, because your gut feel by definition is often much more tightly connected to your personal circumstances, your personal aspirations, and your personal goals. Now, the challenge here, of course, is that in a lot of situations, your gut instinct isn't always correct. Following it is actually a bad call. Now, the aim here should not be to try and perfectly predict whether you should trust your gut instinct or to trust what people are telling you in contradiction to your gut instinct. The aim here should really be to have a framework or a set of principles or processes by which you investigate and make a decision about which one to trust. And it's never going to be perfect. You're going to make the wrong decision, but at least you've got a set of processes to follow each time. Three of the key processes that I would suggest can help you with making this decision without so much stress and in a way where you look back and say, even though it didn't turn out right, I'm glad I followed that process. So the first part of the process is to try and articulate why you have that strong gut feel. Sometimes this is easy, you can break down and sort of psychoanalyze the reasons why you feel a certain way, but other times you may have to talk to other people, explain the strong gut feel, and work with them to try and unpack why you feel that way. The second aspect or process I suggest is checking the framing of your gut feel, and this is probably the most important one. So one of the situations that this comes up really commonly with is when you're talking to a prospective PhD or master's student and they're relatively young, they're relatively inexperienced, they're a high achiever, they've pushed really hard, they've succeeded at a lot of projects, but they're considering doing a PhD under challenging circumstances. Maybe they've got a lot of other responsibilities or other things. And their framing for their gut instinct will be that they've been told repeatedly throughout their life that they can't do something or that they're not going to succeed. And despite that, through sheer resilience, they've managed to succeed in the past. And so their gut instinct will be, I can do this, I can do the PhD. Now, if you're a potential supervisor or someone trying to give them some advice, if they've asked you for it, the tricky bit here is to check whether the framing of their gut feel perfectly aligns with the framing of the situation. So this one comes up all the time because what you're trying to convey to people is that you have no doubt that they have the capability, the talent, and the drive to do something, but there is a reasonable chance that other significant factors in their personal or professional life will mean that they willingly choose not to prioritize that particular activity and hence can't finish it because they want to prioritize these other things. Now, that is not saying that they're not capable of doing it. It's suggesting to them that there are scenarios where they will willingly not want to do it. And sort of decoupling those nuances is really important, not in terms of just how you trust your gut feel, but also in terms of advising people who are operating off a strong gut feel or instinct. A third way of thinking about this decision, whether to trust your gut instinct, is to think about the consequences. So this is a binary decision. You're going to trust your gut instinct or you're not going to trust your gut instinct. One of the ways I like to visualize this is to think about if you go with your gut instinct and it ends up being the wrong decision, what would you say and explain to all those people who you sought advice from and then did the opposite of what their advice suggested to you? Now, this isn't about avoiding slightly awkward or painful discussions, but it is a great way to get some very explicit, visceral visualization of the consequences of trusting your gut feel. And in some cases, that will make you rethink. It will give you pause, you might reconsider. And in other cases, you go, look, I'm very happy to deal with those consequences. I think I could explain to these people why I made this decision and why they may not agree with me. I think they'll understand why I went that way. It's a great sort of thought tool to sort of visualize the consequences of making the decision either way. Finally, another key consideration around deciding whether to trust your gut feel is a general consideration around decision making, and that's looking at upside and downside. So one of the examples where it's very asymmetric in terms of trusting your gut is when you're putting in an application or applying for something that has a very low success rate. So say you're applying for a prestigious grant or fellowship and maybe it has a 5% acceptance rate. So 1 in 20 of an already elite field are going to get accepted. The prior belief on this is you are going to be unsuccessful. So in this situation, the calculus around trusting your gut does change a little bit, because if the conventional wisdom and advice you're getting is how to submit a polished, mature proposal, in a lot of cases that's not going to be enough because everyone else is going to be doing this as well. And you may, in some circumstances, have some gut feel or instinct about something really unorthodox you can do to really differentiate you from those other applications. Now, of course, there's no magic tricks here. Sometimes doing that will mean that your application will instantly get rejected. But in some of those cases, the gut instinct will give you a unique insight or edge or advantage in what is a really competitive application. And so those cases, the calculus is, well, if I go with that gut feel and I'm wrong, I probably haven't changed things much because I had a 1 in 20 chance of getting accepted. But there is a non-trivial chance that that gut instinct has really given me a unique insight into how to get an edge and really substantially improve my chances of succeeding. So this is an example where a very asymmetric opportunity means that you might be more inclined to go with your gut. It doesn't necessarily follow that the converse would follow, but if you're doing something that's relatively mundane and a bunch of much more experienced people are telling you personalized advice that says you should do it one way and your gut is telling you to do it a different way, you have to look at the upside and the downside consequences of that. And in many cases, that will tilt you back towards listening to the conventional wisdom. So I hope this video was useful. Your gut instinct is a really great concept. Your instinct is often really amazing during your professional career, but if you're really pushing your boundaries and pushing where you're working, your gut instinct is often going to be wrong. Sometimes this will be because the framing is wrong and your gut instinct is correct. It's just applied wrongly because the situation doesn't match the situation that your gut instinct is coming from. And in some cases, it will just be wrong for various other reasons. What I'd really suggest is important is coming up with a process or a framework for how you treat these situations, some sort of set of principles, and then occasionally looking back over time and evaluating without second guessing yourself whether you need to tweak those principles to better align with what you're hoping to achieve. This also applies in terms of mentoring and supervision, because the people you're mentoring and supervising will often have a gut instinct about how to do things. And you are often more experienced in the area that they're working in. And so understanding where gut instincts come from, how they can sometimes be correct and sometimes be wrong is very important in terms of how you are tactful and sensitive in offering them advice, which will sometimes contradict their gut instinct. Good luck.